Good evening. We're going to start the meeting now. I'm Dan Moulton, the chair of the Dallas Sierra Club. The very first order of business tonight is we lost Helen Bush, who died suddenly and unexpectedly on Easter Sunday.
Oh my gosh.
Well, let's see. There's Helen in that picture. So, the seriousness of this loss to not only her family, but to this club can hardly be overstated. She was our secretary. She put up signs before the meeting. She attended all manner of activities sponsored by the club, and some that weren't, that she just went to on her own. And she was good people. Well, of course, she was good people. And I think if we could just right now take maybe 10 seconds of silence to commemorate Helen, starting right now, that would be good. Okay, now, John, we can get rid of the pre-meeting slides at this point and put up, we'll do conservation. We now will do our committee reports, where each of our major committees will make a short announcement. And we'll start with our conservation committee. Chris Gouldy, and run those slides.
Okay, those slides are just interesting. I'm going to put them on our website, but they have nothing to do with what I'm going to announce to you right now. Okay, I'm going to be passing around a couple of clipboards. The clipboards are alike. Look at all 3 pages on one of the clipboards, and you will find there things that you can volunteer for and things that you can do for conservation. There is a bill in the Natural Resources Committee tomorrow that we want to send email about tonight, and the address of a place where you can send an email and read more about that bill is on here. Groundwork Dallas will have a litter pickup on May 18th. You can sign up here if you want to go to that. Climate change walk through downtown Dallas. I'm doing one in the evening next Tuesday. You can see videos about ocean dead zones at First Unitarian Church next Friday, a week from Friday. 350.org will have its demonstration against Exxon outside their shareholders meeting that they do every day. Notice that we reuse paper. You don't have to, you can ignore the stuff on the back of the pages. There's another climate change walk through downtown Dallas for the morning of June 8th. We need someone to table at the Juneteenth celebration in June, and someone to table at the Dallas Library Nature Expo in July. And there are a few more things on here. Please look at them. There's your opportunity to volunteer. We have also Jeremy Ayers is going to tell us about a rather urgent and alarming issue we want to respond to.
Thank you. I'm an air quality scientist. I work in the area with asbestos, lead, and several other air pollutants. Not specifically the ones that I'm addressing today, but as you might know, the National Environmental Policy Act enables all U.S. citizens to comment on proposed rule changes that affect the Clean Air Act. And that's what happened on Wednesday. They proposed a rule change that affects the Clean Air Act. The last time that they evaluated these engine test cells, which are what they use to test new boats, power generators, airplanes, basically any kind of engine, was 2003. and they just completed their most recent evaluation. And this proposed rule that was released Wednesday says that the hazardous pollutants that are being released by automobiles, boats, power generators, and airplanes are not a significant enough risk to decrease emissions. That's what that has just been put out in the Federal Registry on Wednesday. Add to that, as our right, according to the National Environmental Policy Act of 1969, we have a right to a public hearing, and we have a right to public comment. The public hearing has to be requested, and they gave a period of time to request a public hearing, 3 business days. The last day to request a public hearing was yesterday. I just found out about it today. So we are unable to request a public hearing. However, we do have less than a month to submit our public comments to the EPA. So I'm going to give you the docket number. It's very easy to find online, but very difficult to understand. So I'm going to give you the docket number, and then I'll explain it just a little bit and what you can put in your public comment. So if you're ready, the docket number is OAR-2018-0753. And we'll get that out in an email. And if you Google that, it'll show you it'll say something about engine test cells. And basically what we need to say that this is not an acceptable proposed rule change. I don't know if you saw this, but the New York Times released a study today that said that the atmospheric carbon dioxide has just passed 415 parts per billion. So you might want to put something in there about that the risk to human health is too great to maintain the current emission standards on automobiles, boats, power generators, and airplanes. That we are calling for a reduction in emission standards at the engine test cells. So once again, I'll say that docket number that you can look up. It's very easy to find. As I say, if you try to read it, it's a little bit confusing, but I've been studying it for the last half hour. This is basically what it means. It's OAR-2018-0753. Any questions? Okay, Chris, who do I go to? Yes, sir.
Could you write that down somewhere, because I couldn't type that into my
I will put that on the conservation page of the,
What is it, Jerry?
Okay, it is OAR-2018-0753. And it is your right as a United States citizen to submit a public comment. So as of right now, there are 0 public comments on the Federal Register website. And as I said, they gave us 3 business days to request a hearing, and the time to request a hearing is already closed. So if you'd like to express outrage about that, I recommend that as well.
Before we continue with committee reports, once again, I have forgotten an important function. I'd like to see a show of hands on how many people here have never attended a Dallas Sierra Club meeting before. Before today. Well, we would like to make sure you know there's a form up here that you can fill out and get our free. You want to hold that up, Ginger, so they can see what it looks like? Well, that's a brochure, right? A form you can fill out and get our free email newsletter every month. It's a very good newsletter. Okay, now, the next committee, let's do outings now. Mr. Mark Stein thought he was out, but we pulled him back in.
There's a story. This is big news. I thought as of the beginning of March, I wouldn't be up here doing announcements again. Then about 2 months later, after Bill Greer, who's been the outings chair for more years than I had, advised us that he was moving to Colorado. His wife, Sue, has accepted a position with the Pueblo Zoo in Colorado, and so come July, they're going to be in Colorado. We're gonna have a send-off for Bill. Saturday, June 1st, 6:30 p.m. at the Blue Goose Cantina on Midway Road. It's a place that we go after these meetings, right? That's
Yes.
tonight's Blue Goose here. Same place. We've got a room reserved. It's a Dutch treat, and we'd like to have reservations. If you're on any of the, if you're on the outings mailing list, check your mail. You have an invitation to be there. So it's our chance to say goodbye to Bill until they come back to visit, or we go visit them in Colorado, and we're surely going to miss them. A couple other outings items. We've got a couple of good day hikes coming up. Tuesday night, 6 to 8 o'clock this week. Chris Goldie is doing one of her downtown climate change walks. I did one of these 10 days ago, I think. It's a great hike, whether you just want a good 2-mile walk for 2 hours, or whether you want to learn a lot about climate change, which you will. I commend this to you. Check, it's on the outings list, and it's a fun outing to do. You can have lunch downtown while you're there afterwards, or dinner before, whatever you're going to do. There's another hike on May 21st, not May 21st. The Saturday, June 1st, in the morning, same day as the send-off party for Bill and Sue. Good day hike at Breckenridge Park. Check that one out. We have a few spots left on if you're a backpacker with some experience and you can take a week to go hike in Colorado. We're going to the Uncompahgre Wilderness, southwest of Gunnison. About an 18-mile hike. We're going to take 4 miles to do it. That's one option. The other option is do the same loop but with a little spur. Is this the time to wrap it up signal? With a spur to get up and do a 14er. It's online. I've got about 3 spots. 20 spots are taken. But if that's interesting to you, check online and refresh quickly. Here's another thing. We've got books all around here, courtesy of Jim Vornberg. Over here, you're going to find a selection of great books on fitness, on outings, adventures, and they're all free. They're here, and over there by the outings stand-up board, there are more books. I even saw one on Yellowstone over there. Hey, these are not books for free. These belong to our speaker, but anything on this table and over there are yours for the taking. Jim would like them to go home with you tonight, because he doesn't want to have to carry them back to his house. So there's some good stuff here to look. There's no charge for them. Okay, that's all I've got to say.
Thank you, Mark. Man, you come to our meetings, you get food, we give you presents. You'd be a fool not to come back. Let's see. Victor, Paul, do you guys want to say something about the programs?
Sure.
Before we get to David? And Liz, you said you didn't have anything to say tonight, right? Wow, that's different.
Hi everyone, I hope you can hear me all right. For those of you who this is your first time at a Dallas Sierra Club meeting, my name is Victor, and Victor Zatucci and Paul were co-chairs for the programs. So we have the distinct pleasure of scheduling all the events for the general meetings. We're also the people that get the food, so people are always happy to see us when we show up to the meetings. We actually will be stepping down as program co-chairs. Even though we were new to Dallas, I had the pleasure of accepting a position at the Environmental Protection Agency in Washington, D.C. as an environmental attorney.
Go get 'em!
So you guys will have a friend in DC there, and please, I don't want our connections to stop just because we're outside of the Dallas area. But with that being said, because we're stepping down, we are recruiting individuals to come and do our positions. It's a distinct pleasure and wonderful opportunity to meet a bunch of great environmental folks, to go and see all the different areas and learn about the different topics. It's also just a wonderful opportunity to work with the executive committee, who are all fantastic people and who will welcome you and who have the experience to show you the ropes on what exactly it means to be programs co-chair. So that's the update that we have. Paul, if you wanted to say anything.
I just wanted to say I appreciate everything Dallas Sierra Club did for us, and we learned a lot, and we really wish we could do it for longer. But again, thank you so much for the opportunity again, and we hope that someone will be able to fill in our shoes, and we'll be working very closely with the next program chair.
Yeah, if you do have an interest in that, just come out to us after the meeting. We won't bite. And we'll be happy to do that. And then we'll be up here in a little bit to continue. Or do we have anyone else for committee?
Yeah, we've got Dave.
Oh, I'll just do my committee report with my presentation.
Okay.
It's the same thing.
You have a present, a whole talk.
The short one, the short.
Okay, I think they're not on the list.
Okay.
We get a chance.
Okay. Paul and Victor are the kind of guys we are trying to get. They're young. But they're also mobile, so that's a problem that we have with the young guys. So are you going to give your program now, David?
Sure, do they want to introduce it? Or do you want me to introduce my own program?
This is David Griggs. He is our political committee chair, and why don't you introduce it? That way you'll get the introduction you want.
Well, I'm David Griggs. I want to thank Victor and Paul. Obviously, they coordinated the programs tonight, and we appreciate all of you. I have two actual reasons for being up here. One is to tell you about the runoff elections in Dallas, and the other is to kill time so that the sun will go down so that your slides will look better, in a few moments. We cannot lower the shades because of several reasons. But in just a few minutes, the sun will be gone, and hopefully it'll be a little bit darker up here so that we can see it. As most of you know, the election for Dallas City Council and Mayor was held on May 4th. But there were several races that didn't quite make it to the finish line. No one got 50% plus one of the vote. So we're going to have some very, very important runoffs. And the Dallas Sierra Club has endorsed several key people in these races. Hopefully you all voted in that race, or if you live in Dallas. Many of the suburbs sort of completed their elections, and we don't have any further runoffs, but we do in Dallas. And several of the races are important. We made endorsements because, as many of you know, as conservationists, we are down at City Hall all the time trying to promote green initiatives and to support things that the council works on that are important to the environmental community. And we've made a lot of success in the last few years. We actually have been instrumental in electing certain people of the council that have voted very much for pro-environment positions. We had a huge victory with the passage of the comprehensive environmental plan for the city. We almost got, I think, a unanimous vote on the council, which is really unheard of for something that ambitious. We won the vote when the industrial cement batch plants were being proposed in Joppy, down in District 7. With the council member that we had supported there, we were able to actually make some real inroads. We got a 9-5 vote on the council to not approve the proposals for those batch plants. And we could go on and on for a number of ways in which the support that we've had for candidates has been important. So it's really, really important in these 4 runoff races, if you live in those districts, to vote. you don't, you can help us in a number of ways. You can help us with a donation to the campaign through our PAC. If you don't have a lot of time to give personally to walk the precinct and make calls and that sort of thing, if you do have that time, we want to pass around something for you to fill that out and let us know that you would like to be a volunteer in those campaigns, and we can put you to work over the next month. Okay, let's take that first slide and take a look at it. These are the endorsements that we have made. And just to tell you a little bit about the endorsements, we have a political committee in our club, and that committee makes recommendations after sending out questionnaires, looking at voting records, and just historical knowledge of that candidate if they're an incumbent, or their positions if they're a challenger. We make a recommendation to the executive committee, the Dallas Group Executive Committee, that then votes on that recommendation. And then it goes to the chapter the chapter executive committee for final approval. So there's several layers of the approval of our endorsement process. But these are the ones who are left over. I will tell you that we won victory in District 1. We elected a new council member, Chad West, to follow Scott Griggs, who represented District 1. Adam Pedrano was re-elected in District 2. We endorsed him. In District 4, we have Carolyn Arnold, who is an incumbent. That's what the I means in parentheses. She has been a good council member for us. She had about 45% of the vote, 46% of the vote. Her nearest challenger had 20-something%. So we're hoping that Carolyn will get back in and be re-elected in District 4. District 4, if you don't know where that is essentially look at downtown and then go south between I-35 and I-45. That's essentially District 4. It's in South Dallas, south of downtown. District 7 is the council district where Kevin Felder was. Kevin was someone we endorsed. He was not able to make it into the runoff. There were 9 candidates running in that race. There always is in District 7. That's essentially Fair Park and points in the old traditional South Dallas area and all the way down to Jockey. Jockey is where the ground central zero of our environmental justice work is going on there, and Highland Hills in that same general area. So Adam Bazaldua is a young candidate who was about 33 or 4 years old. He had a great questionnaire response. We didn't endorse it the first time because we were supporting Kevin Felder, the incumbent. Kevin didn't make the runoff, so we've now endorsed Adam. And so we're hoping that he can get in on District 7. District 9, Aaron Moore is running. That is the seat that Mark Clayton is vacating if you live in that area. District 9 is essentially most of the Lakewood area on either side. Well, actually mostly on the east side of White Rock Lake. But there are other areas of White Rock that are included in that area. And then finally, District 14, Philip Kingston, an incumbent council member, needs our help. He is one of our very best supporters on the council. District 14 is sort of the end streets and portions of old Lakewood, a little bit south of 9, and parts of the uptown area and so forth, and a little bit of downtown. That is District 14. And then, of course, for mayor, we've endorsed Scott Griggs. Scott was the council member in District 1 who was turned out, and that's the one where Chad West was elected. So we were able to get that. District 6, we also had a victory with Omar Narvaez was re-elected, and we have supported Omar as well. So hopefully I've called out one district maybe that you live in or that you know about. Now, let me tell you, if you go back to Scott for just a minute, Scott is running against Eric Johnson. Both of them have decent environmental records, but Scott has been with the city, and this is a very interesting race because many of the pro-business developer types for the big money, they didn't make the runoff. And Scott and Eric are in that runoff. And it's real interesting to follow the money. All you have to do is just see who's given to whom, and you will sort of see very easily that this is very much an establishment versus an anti-establishment race. It has nothing really to do with race. It has everything to do with power and influence and who's paying who to do what. So pay attention and watch the news and follow what is going on in that race. But Scott has had 8 years on the council. I don't think he's ever cast a vote that was not pro-environment. Just about everything that we have stood for, he and Philip Kingston and the other champions on the council have been in favor of. Now, Eric's a nice guy. He's got a pretty good record in the House of Representatives in Austin, but he definitely has a lot of the, I would call it pro-developer support that we often see in Dallas. So make your own decision, but those are the candidates that we have endorsed, and we hope that you will be there on election day to help them win. The early voting, and you can go to the next one. The early voting starts on, well, I don't have that. Oh yeah, I do, at the top. May 28th through June the 4th is the early voting period. And as you know, you can vote anywhere in the city of Dallas that day, and you don't have to go to your polling place. However, if you wait till election day, which is Saturday, June the 8th, you have to go to wherever your precinct is voting. So just sort of remember that. It's easier to vote early because you don't have to worry about where you have to go. DallasCountyVotes.org is where you can find out where those early voting locations are. You can also follow the election results that night, which is a pretty good thing to do. You can know before the media does who's won the early vote. And what I want to really emphasize here is our PAC. TurnTexasGreen.org is the Sierra Club Political Committee of Texas website. And that is where you can go to make a donation if you would like to help the candidates. Many of you came to our fundraiser at Times 10 Cellars back on April the 22nd, Earth Day. We raised a lot of money. We raised about $4,500, which was really, really helpful. We distributed that money in the first round of the races. We have a little bit left, but we want to try to raise another $2,500 or so in order to help the candidates for the runoff. So in order to do that, we need your support. Whether you give $15 or $1,500, we would love to have it. I have a computer set up over here. If you would like to come by tonight with your credit card and make a contribution of whatever size you wish, we'll take it. If you have your checkbook, Texas Sierra Club PAC would be great. You can write us a check, or we'll even take cash. So if you'd like to help with the donations, the money's got to go to those 5 candidates. So I will divide it accordingly. So I hope that you'll be willing to do that. If you want to know what district you're in, if you want to see maps, I have maps up here to describe in more detail what I gave you generally earlier. So you can actually find where you live and figure out if you live in one of those districts. You probably know because there's a lot of activity going on right now after the election. But if for some reason you don't, and you want to find out if you're in districts 4, 7, 9, and 14, we'll be able to help you figure that out. Questions? Anybody have a question? Yes?
David, is anybody knocking on doors and doing that stuff?
Well, each candidate has their own door knocking plans. I know that Scott Griggs and Philip Kingston particularly have strong neighborhood walks, and we can certainly connect you with those campaigns. Every single day, Philip Kingston and Scott Griggs have people out walking, and I suspect Aaron has some of that too. I don't know about Adam and Carolyn, probably not Carolyn. Adam may need some help, but see me afterwards if you're interested. I'm going to probably send around this little sheet that you all can write on if you'd like to volunteer for a campaign. Arvin?
Point out that turnout for these runoff elections is abysmally low, and so your vote really, really, really counts.
It does, especially in a runoff. I mean, it was like 9% or something, 9 or 10%. And then so for the runoff, it'll be half that. It'll be 4 or 5%. So we actually had a candidate one time who won by 30 votes at a runoff, and that was in District 10. And we had 300 members in that district. We sent cards and we called all 300 members and the candidate won by 30 votes in a runoff. So it's really, really important for you to support votes in the runoff. And a little bit of money goes a long way too. Runoff money is even better than before election money, because the candidates are afraid they're not gonna make the runoff, so they spend all their money to make sure they do, and then they don't have any for the runoff. You know, so it's really important for us to make sure that we continue to support them. So any other questions? Please volunteer and please make some donations. And if you don't want to do that tonight, just remember this website, turntexasgreen.org. You can go there and find the contribute button, and it takes you to PayPal. And you can do it tonight or tomorrow or a week from now or 2 weeks from now. So just know that your contribution will be very much appreciated. So I think I've killed enough time to allow for Tom to give his slideshow. I know that Victor's going to give the official introduction of Tom because you've probably written something up on your website for that. But I've known Tom for over 20 years, well, more than that, 30 years. But we worked together for about 20 years at the Federal Trade Commission. And I remember every year Tom would go off for a week or two vacation to Yellowstone National Park. And I think I bought all his books. I hope you brought some of those tonight. This one in particular. I don't know, are you selling these? Okay. I'm going to promote this because he didn't want to. This is a great book, guys. It's called Day Hiking Yellowstone. I've actually used it. He's got one for 3 different parts, I think. He's got a red one and a green one and a yellow one. I'll let you tell him. He can tell you about it. But I guess Dan will bring up Victor for the official introduction.
Thank you, David. And one lesson on the election. It's really important. When Paul and I went to go vote, I think we went around midday, and we were the 22nd and 23rd voters that they had seen all day. So super important. So be sure to pay him a visit or turntexasgreen.org. So for our main presentation tonight, we have Mr. Tom Carter, who it's a real pleasure to have you here. And I just want to give you a little bit of background about why it's so special that we have him as a guest today. Mr. Carter has hiked over 6,000 miles of the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. He is the author of 3 hiking guides: the Day Hiking Yellowstone, Day Hiking Grand Teton National Park, and Day Hiking the Wind River Range. He's actually credited with discovering one of the highest waterfalls in the park and naming another of those. So it's a wonderful honor to have him tonight. So if you can please join me in giving him a warm welcome to the Dallas Sierra Club.
Thank you. I think I'm mic'd up. So I got my mics for, are we good for the camera or whatever? Good, and we're mic'd. So, all right, this is Yellowstone. We're going to talk about Yellowstone. How many people have been to Yellowstone? Just about everybody. And I know everybody's heard of it. That's great. So I love Yellowstone, and there's nothing I like better than sharing and talking about Yellowstone. So we're going to talk about a lot of fun things in Yellowstone. Let me see if this will work. It does. There we go. So, and we even have one of these. Does this work? I'm looking for the, there we go, kind of working. Well, anyway, Yellowstone. Yellowstone is a really special place. It's America's first national park, the world's first national park, 1872, March 1st. It was signed into law. It wasn't Teddy Roosevelt, it was Ulysses S. Grant, okay? It was, Teddy Roosevelt was still a teenager. 3,472 square miles, it's big, okay? So it's like, bigger than, it's about the size of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, basically. So it's located in Montana, Wyoming, and in Idaho. There's about 96% of it in Wyoming. It's in the upper northwest corner of Wyoming, 3% in Montana along the top. I don't know if this is going to work or not. So this little top part there, this picture, this is Yellowstone. Top part there is Montana. Little portion down here is Idaho, and the rest of it's Wyoming. 300 miles of paved highways in the park. It makes sort of like a figure 8 here. And they call it the upper loop and the lower loop, and then there's 5 entrance roads: East Gate, Northeast Gate, North Gate, West Gate, South Gate. In 2015, they went over 4 million visitors. When I first worked there in 1973, it was just over 2 million. So it's doubled in that almost 50-year period of time. Peaked at 4.3 million visitors in the centennial for the Park Service in 2016, and it's dropped back down. It's about 4.1 million right now. It's the crown of the continent. I mean, we're going to talk more about the rivers here in a minute. To me, it's the wild heart of North America. I mean, it is so wonderful. So, and you've already heard a little bit about me, but why am I here talking about it? I did work 6 summers in Yellowstone in the 70s. I was a tour guide on buses, and I hiked almost 7,000 miles down the Greater Yellowstone. And we're going to talk about the difference between Yellowstone National Park and the Greater Yellowstone here as we get into this. I actually founded the hiking program for the employees in Yellowstone with my little book that's still being sold, and led field trips for the Greater Yellowstone Coalition and for the All Park Recreation Department and for Yellowstone Forever, which is the nonprofit education group that run the visitor centers and do a lot of field trips in the park. And so, and I'm really proud, we're going to talk a little bit towards the end. I did all the trail guides, or primarily most of the trail descriptions for REI's free app for Yellowstone. And we're going to download that, and it's a lot of fun. So at any rate, and I have a YouTube in Yellowstone that's got 2.5 million hits, so that's kind of fun. We might see that here in a minute. Anyway, so this is what we're going to talk about. We're going to 7 questions, okay, that we're going to talk tonight. What makes Yellowstone special? Who discovered it? Is the Yellowstone supervolcano going to blow like on Wednesday? Did the forest fires in '88 destroy the park? We're going to talk a little bit about the best places to stay and the best places to hike. And I know a lot of people are going to be really interested. We're going to talk about 5 current environmental issues facing the park. Some of them are threats and some of them are opportunities. So I know you'll be interested in that. And we'll talk about a little bonus on books, maps, apps, and other kind of good fun stuff. So there we go. That's the agenda. So first of all, what makes Yellowstone so special? It's the first national park in the world. Some have said the national park system is America's best idea. And so it's special there. Why did they make it a park? Well, it's the world's largest hydrothermal area. Basically about 10,000 hot springs and other fumaroles and mud pots and geysers in Yellowstone, which is about half of all of those in the world. And it has 500 active geysers, which is also about half of the geysers in the world. So I've got most of the pictures here are my own. Some are with the parks, they're Park Service pictures. But so bottom right, that's Grand Prismatic Spring. It's one of the largest hot springs in the world. It's taken from a brand new overlook that they just built. It's like the first significant new trail and overlook in Yellowstone in like 50 years. And it's a spectacular, people have been seeing all these pictures from the sky, and they wanted to see this spectacular hot. That's Grand Prismatic. That's a hot springs, and then the steam vents up in the upper left there. Those are fumaroles, okay, and then the mud pots are down in the lower left, and then geysers up there on the right. So to have a hot spring, you got to have a heat source close to the surface and a water source. The heat source in Yellowstone, all over the world there's the molten rock underneath the crust, about 20 miles down. Yellowstone is more like 2 to 3 miles down. So it's just right there. It's this plume of molten volcanic rock and lava that's below Yellowstone, and that's the engine that drives Yellowstone. And it's got huge amounts of water, and then you got a good plumbing system. So if you got lots of water, you got a hot springs. If you got a little bit less water, you get a fumarole or steam vent, gas vents. If you get a very acidic steam and gas vents, sometimes that'll decay the rock and turn it to mud. So you get a mud pot with steam coming up through it. And then geysers got a real special plumbing system, so that there's little constrictions in there, and hot water rises just like hot air rises, and you get a convection, the cold water coming down and the hot water rising. You get a few bubbles and you get it on that constriction, and they kind of back up and then they flash through. And there's so much, the water column is so heavy that the pressure is so great that the superheated water down there, like 400 degrees Fahrenheit. And when you get those little bubbles flashing through, okay, so all of you have been to Yellowstone just about. You've seen Old Faithful, right? And it bubbles up. What's going on? So those bubbles are going through, and that releases some of the pressure, and it reduces the flash point to steam, the boiling point, because down low, before that starts to bubble up, it's 400 degrees, but it's not boiling. But when it starts to flash, reduces the pressure, you start this cycle, and it bubbles up a little bit more, and all of a sudden you just get this chain reaction that causes geysers. That's how geysers are up. So anyway, what makes Yellowstone special? Geysers. Also, animals. Oh, we love animals. So Yellowstone has all of the major megafauna that was there when Europeans first came to this continent. It's really one of the few places in the Northern Hemisphere that has that. I've listed some of the more principal animals there, antelope, buffalo, the symbol of the National Park Service. If it weren't for Yellowstone, we may not have buffalo. We went from 35 million in the Great Plains, mass slaughter in the late 1800s, down to about 300 or so in around the turn of the century, 1900, and most of those were in Yellowstone. They brought others into Yellowstone, and they interbred them. Yellowstone has the only purebred long-term buffalo anywhere in the world. And so it saved the buffalo, or the bison is a technical term. Anyway, grizzlies, wolf. Let's talk about wolves. Wolf, y'all familiar with the wolf reintroduction? How many people knew that yeah. So they had an eradication program, and by the 1920s, they had killed off all the wolves in Yellowstone. They tried to kill off all the coyotes too, but the coyotes were pretty resilient. Come 1995, they started introduction program, 2 summers. They brought in 31 gray wolves from Canada, placed them there, and within 2 years, there were 85 wolves, and now there are over 500 wolves in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. And this map right here, so Yellowstone's just up there in the upper left corner, and the Grand Tetons down here, and you got the Wind River Native American Indian Reservation as part of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. So there's like 48 different packs, all have their own little names that have a alpha, male, and female, and these are well established at this point. So great, tremendous. It's like a cottage industry now. People are going up, they go just there to see wolves. Springtime is a great time because they're denning and the wolves are near where the pups are born, and so they're pretty much in pretty stable areas, and they come out to hunt in the evenings, and so there's a good chance to see wolves, particularly in the Lamar Valley, which is in the upper northeast corner of Yellowstone. You see wolves out there. They got the American Serengeti, because it's not just wolves, it's all kinds of wonderful animals there. So other things that make Yellowstone special. They're higher mountains, but it has spectacular mountains. This is a mountain, Electric Peak. There's a trail that goes up Electric Peak. It's 8 feet short of 11,000. It's in the Gallatin Range, and it's one of the few pretty almost 11,000 or over 11,000 foot peaks that are readily accessible with trail. Anyway, there's tons of wonderful mountains. There are deeper canyons, but Yellowstone has spectacular canyons. The Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone, this is taken from Artist Point. It's about 800 foot deep there. The canyon gets about 1,200 feet deep as it wraps around about almost 20 miles long. And it's also got wonderful waterfalls. That's the lower falls. There's bigger lakes, but oh my gosh, Yellowstone Lake is so spectacular. It has 110 miles of shoreline. It's at 7,733 feet, makes it the largest lake for its elevation above sea level anywhere in the United States. These were some pictures I took on a 4-day kayak trip, and we just covered about a third of the shoreline on that trip. And that's spectacular. So the picture of the sunset down there on the bottom, took that picture. The smoke from fires in Oregon blew in that day, and it made a really spectacular sunset. Anyway, Yellowstone Lake is amazing. Also, Shoshone Lake is the largest backcountry lake in the lower 48. There's only trails, no roads to it. It's also in Yellowstone. So amazing lakes, rivers. There's so many rivers. 2/3 of the Missouri River form in Yellowstone. The Gallatin and the Missouri River both form in Yellowstone, and they, together with the Jefferson, form the Missouri. The Yellowstone River actually forms up a little bit south of Yellowstone and runs north through the park. The Yellowstone River, 670 miles long, undammed. It is the longest undammed river in North America, or in the United States, lower 48. It's a spectacular river. And the Snake River forms in Yellowstone, which is a major tributary to the Columbia River. So it's got tremendous rivers. Waterfalls. That's Union Falls. I call that lunchbox beautiful. For those of us who are old enough to remember the little metal lunchbox took to school. That's 250 feet high. That is an amazing falls, and there's two falls. There's actually two rivers that meet together at the brink, and that's why it's called Union Falls. And that's a 16-mile round-trip hike just to get there. Okay, and there's over 250 waterfalls in Yellowstone, over 15 feet tall, and there's amazing waterfalls in Yellowstone. The main one, of course, is 308-foot lower falls. You got 109-foot upper falls of the Yellowstone, but amazing waterfalls. Wildflowers, spectacular wildflowers, amazing place to see that. And so bottom line, what makes Yellowstone so special? I mean, it's the most amazing place in my mind anywhere. There's so many things that it has. There's something for everybody in Yellowstone. So who discovered Yellowstone? Okay, well, obviously Native Americans were there long before any white folks, right? And they were living there for at least 5,000 years. If not living there, they were at least visiting the geyser areas. It's pretty high elevation. The plateau of Yellowstone, mostly above 7,500 feet, so pretty hard to live there in the winter. But Native Americans frequented the area to hunt and so forth for at least 5,000 years. But the first white folks, John Coulter, who was a hunter as part of the Lewis and Clark expedition. He was a very valued member of that expedition, and on the return from the Pacific, he asked if he couldn't stay. They met up with some fur trappers that were going to go out and trap, and they needed a guide, and John Coulter asked if he couldn't leave the Lewis and Clark expedition, and he was the only member of the expedition that they granted permission to do that. And he stuck around and visited what's now Yellowstone, most likely in the winter of 1806, 1807. And he went and established a fort on the mouth of the Yellowstone River in the Missouri. In the old days, trappers would trade, and they would ask the Native Americans to come in for trade goods, and they would bring. But then later they had the rendezvous system, which you may be familiar with, where they didn't trade. They sent independent trappers throughout, and then they have a big rendezvous, and they get together, and the trappers would trade for goods. At any rate, the folks that first visited Yellowstone, we had fur trappers in the 1820s and 1830s. Then you had gold and other hard mineral prospectors that came through Yellowstone through the 1860s. Fortunately, they didn't find hardly anything. And that's why we have Yellowstone, because of the volcanic nature of the park. There's just really, the minerals are all kind of around outside the park. They're not in the park itself. So the famous Bannock Trail, as the buffalo were being killed off on the west slope of the Continental Divide, the Bannock and Shoshone would traverse Yellowstone on the famous Bannock Trail for like 40 years, 50 years, well, from 1840 to 1878. They would come through Yellowstone to get to the buffalo in the open plains on the eastern side of the Continental Divide. So first expeditions, officially, when they were looking to sort of find Yellowstone for Yellowstone itself, not for minerals, not for trapping, so forth, for hunting. The most important one was first in 1869, the Washburn-Langford-Doane expedition. Washburn was the surveyor general of the state of Montana, and he led that trip. Then the next summer of 1870 came, excuse me, I got my years wrong. It was Washburn was 70 and Hayden survey was 71. That was an official U.S. Geological Survey, and they went back and lobbied to set Yellowstone aside as a national park. So who discovered Yellowstone? That's kind of some information on that. Will the Yellowstone volcano, supervolcano, erupt soon? I know that you've seen stories. People say, oh, it's going to glow, and we've seen this happening. The dome was rising, and so here's the scoop. Okay, so Yellowstone has had 3 significant calderas. And what's a caldera? Caldera is where a giant volcano, I mean, we're talking miles and miles across, wells up, blows out, its insides out, craters in and forms a massive crater, and then in Yellowstone's case, subsequent lava flows flow in and fill it up kind of like a pool, swimming pool. Okay, so you have this high plateau, which is basically what Yellowstone is, and then you have all these cracks around through these lava flows, and that's the plumbing. That's where the water comes up and seeps up and makes the geysers, and that's why they're there. So there's 3 significant calderas. I'm going to do it this way. So 2.3 million years ago, we have this one. That's the first Yellowstone caldera. This one was 1.3 million years ago. That's the Island Park caldera. Excuse me, the first one was here, this light one. The third one was this one. And this is the one that went 640,000 years ago. Okay, so you got 3, and the sequence is getting shorter. Okay, between the first one and the second one was about 800,000 years, and between the second one and the third one was about 670,000 years, and we're now sitting at 640, right? So any minute now, right? And then there's got these resurgent domes they're watching. So what's happening? The whole park is rising in these domes. Okay, and it's like the lake is tipping. There's campsites down on the southeast arm and south arm they're flooded now because the lake is tipping. It's coming up here and it's falling relative in the southern parts. And so they're saying, and then there's tons of earthquakes, earthquake swarms. There's hundreds of earthquakes every year. There's significant ones. And so everybody looks at that and says, oh, it's going to go. Well, don't count on it. And that's a good thing, I think, because when, and let me just talk a little bit about how big this was, okay, because who's heard of Mount St. Helens in Washington State? Okay, 1980, okay, ash covered the streets in Seattle, and Truman, let's see, what's his name? Harry Truman was killed in Spirit Lake and all that stuff. Big deal. The first Yellowstone caldera was 8,000 times bigger. Okay, it was, what is it? I got it up there. It's like 600 cubic miles it welled up and blew out. I mean, it's almost unimaginable how big that is. Okay, the second one was 67 cubic miles, and then the third one, which is generally considered the Yellowstone caldera now, was 240 cubic miles. I mean, they found solid rock from that eruption in Kansas. Okay, they found ash that they've been able to identify all over the earth. Okay, if and when the Yellowstone caldera blows again, I mean, ash will cover the earth and it will blot out the sun, and we won't have global warming. It will all be freezing. So it's that kind of a catastrophic event. So anyway, that's the Yellowstone caldera. And then let's talk about the forest fires. I'm sure everybody heard about the great 88 fires in Yellowstone, and they were significant. It was called the geological event of the century. There's 2.2 million acres in Yellowstone proper, and 794,000 of them burned. That's a lot, okay? And this map shows the fires of 1988. There were, I forget, there were over 50 separate fires, but they sort of grew together, and you get the huge North Fork fire, the Clover Mist fire, the Snake Complex down here is kind of a dark color. You can't really see it that well. But, and as one, 70-mile-an-hour winds, they traveled as much as 2 miles an hour. They advanced as much as 10 miles in a day. It was really just, it was an amazing thing. Everything was dry and never rained. So I love this quote, because this was the fire boss, said, we tried everything we could think of, and the fire kicked their ass from one end of the park to the other. And what did? They built They sent in the Marines, literally. There were 25,000 firefighters. They spent $10 million. There were 117 aircraft. They dropped 1.4 million gallons of fire retardant, 10 million gallons of water. And they really, all they were able to do was save a few structures. Okay, they could not stop these fires. Okay, but what they did do is they constructed 32 miles of bulldozer lane that's still there. Okay, and kind of mars up the surface. And there are still effects. Now this picture up on the top part there, that's the Old Faithful area. I had a cabin that was not in '88, but earlier that was just beyond the picture shop right there. It didn't burn, but it got real close. There were a number of cabins in the Old Faithful area that did burn. The only way they were even able to save the Old Faithful Inn, they had recently, fortunately, installed this system of barrels of slurry on top of the inn. And as the fire rolled down, they blew them. And it just drenched the whole inn in slurry and fire retardant. But they said they really thought, believe it or not, that the thing that saved the Old Faithful Inn was the huge parking lot, because it was a fire break. But the fire just jumped over the parking lot and the inn and the whole upper geyser basin and just moved right on the other side. But at any rate, did it destroy the park? No. In fact, fire is just a natural occurrence at Yellowstone. They've tracked it for thousands of years. And there's been major fires like that periodically throughout modern history that they've been able to see in the trees and other vegetation that's still there. There are some trees that are over 300 years old that are still there. And was it really good or bad? It was just natural. It wasn't necessarily good or bad. I mean, for hikers, the bad thing is there were these serotinous cones on the lodgepole pine, which make about 80% of the vegetation in the park. And they only open it at 120 degrees Fahrenheit. And they dropped as many as 1,000 seeds per square foot. And now you've got this wall of trees. You really got to know your vegetation, because you can just hit one of these walls and you just can't even get through it almost. You get down like a quarter of a mile an hour trying to get through the dog hair. But it's natural. And so, and the Park Service at the time, they fought it because they had to, they felt they had to. But before that, and certainly now, what they're attempting to do is to not fight fires and let it return to its natural systems. They only fight fires when they threaten people and structures. And there's lots of fires. In fact, I was going to talk about global warming and stuff is really changing things. Okay, so here's a fire map of Yellowstone, and all of that yellow, light tan, that's the '88 fires. Okay, the blue, the little areas of blue were pre-1920, and the areas of green, let me see if I get this right. The areas of green, I gotta get this right, hang on. The point here is, there's a lot more fires now. When I was a tour guide in Yellowstone, so the areas, the blue is before 1920, the green is before 1960, and the pink and red are since 2000. Okay, so there's a lot of pink and red out there. Okay, and the biggest fire year they had since '88 was 2016, and 70,000 acres burned that year. So, what my point is, when I was a tour guide in Yellowstone, hiked everywhere all the time, there were almost no forest fires that we had to worry about. In fact, there were only like 3 places you could even point out on the roads where you could see effects of a fire. Now, every summer, there's multiple fires. I have to change my plans of where I'm hiking or plan around forest fires. It's just hotter, drier, more fires. Anyway, so I was asked to sort of do 2 parts to this. The first part, we're coming to a close here, sort of what's Yellowstone about, give a sense of place, and to prepare folks if they want to take a visit, and some advice and those kinds of things. We're wrapping that up, and then we're going to get into the environmental issues here in just a second. But what do I think is the best place to stay? The Old Faithful Inn. How many people have been to the Old Faithful Inn? This amazing 300-foot vaulted giant Lincoln log place spectacular. And the Lake Hotel is actually older. The Old Faithful Inn was built in 1903. Lake Hotel, which is sort of a old Southern style column wood frame hotel on Yellowstone Lake, was built in 1890. So it's actually quite a bit older. Those are the two spectacular places. There are other places, but if you can stay at one of those, really special. Then if you want a little smaller place, the Roosevelt Lodge up in the top part there, they've got little rustic cabins, and that's also really close to the Lamar Valley. And so all the folks that want to watch wolves and look for animals, they want to stay at Roosevelt Lodge. It fills up really quick. And then Mammoth Hot Springs has a fun sort of area of cabins that all circle there, and it's kind of a community feeling in that, so I like those. I'm going to give you, I got handouts here. Can I get somebody to help me? I'm going to take some information with you. On this handout is a phone number. And they started the 1st of May, a couple of weeks ago, accepting reservations for 2020. Not this summer, but next summer. And if you want to, and they have a really generous cancellation policy, okay? So you can call, you can book a week, and they'll charge you the first night, and you can cancel with no fee 30 days in advance. So if you have any inkling that you might go, call now and book for not this summer, but the summer after. And also, keep in mind that a lot of people book and then cancel. So if you call them 30 days before you'd like to go, you might get lucky. Okay, get you a place in West Yellowstone at the Holiday Inn or whatever, but then call before you go. And don't just go to the website. This is one of the best tips I can give you, because if you call the number I have down here for Yellowstone Lodges, many times they can get you a reservation that you can't see if you just go to their website. Okay, well, the website's also on there. But you can do it, and myself and a lot of folks, every summer we find ways to get rooms in the Old Faithful Inn and other really desirable places by calling at the right time. So, okay, where's a place to camp? There's huge Bridge Bay and Grant Village are the kind of the really mega campgrounds, and they take reservations for those at the same place that you can call to get a lodging in the hotels and lodges. And the smaller places like Lewis and then way up in the northeast corner, Pebble Creek and Slough Creek are great places to stay. So anyway, this is kind of equipping you, and there's lots of this information is on the handout. Okay, so what are the best places to hike? I'm going to talk about that in a second. What I want everybody to do is get out your phone. I'm going to wait. Get out your phone, and I'm going to tell you how to download a free app from REI, Recreation Equipment Inc. It was their gift to the National Park Service in 2016. It has trails for every national park and lots of national monuments, and it's free and it's really terrific. And in a minute, I'm going to show you how to use it. But for now, just go to REI Co-op National Park, and you'll see that little logo, the REI logo. And it's free, and just download it. In a few minutes, we'll come back to it. It was really terrific. So some of my favorite hikes, the South Rim, they have a trail that goes all up and down on either side, the North and South Rim of the Grand Canyon. I love the South Rim that takes you from Upper Falls, that big 308-foot falls, to Artist Point. You can also go to Storm Point. It's a really neat little couple-mile hike out and a couple mile back on Yellowstone Lake that takes you out to this point. It's really spectacular. There's going up Avalanche Peak. It's one of the easiest 10,000-foot hike in the park. You can get up about 10.5 on just 2 miles and up less than 2,000 feet because you're starting at a really high point on the East Entrance Road. The fossil forest, Yellowstone, there's so many things that are special about Yellowstone. Yellowstone has one of the most amazing fossil forests, with the largest, most extensive fossil forest, like 27 separate layers of trees. All have been buried and fossilized over millions of years. Okay, there's all kind of going to Heart Lake. It's just a spectacular overnight hike. So we're going to talk about that app here in a minute. But now, the environmental issues, okay? So we'll talk about 5 different things. But we're going to talk about environmental issues in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. So what is that? Okay, so Yellowstone is here, Grand Teton here. These dark green areas are wilderness areas in the national forest. There's actually 5 different national forests. I think I said 6 up here, but there's 2 have been combined in recent years. And so all the green is national forest, the dark green is wilderness area. These pink, these are wild scenic rivers. They've been designated by Congress, protected. As I said, you get the Wind River Indian Reservation. This is the Wind River Range. Here, the Wyoming Range. And it goes on up into the Beartooth to the northeast of Yellowstone. And we're going to talk in a minute about the Gallatin Range. If this thing worked. The Gallatin Range there is currently unprotected. We're going to talk about that here in just a second. In fact, let's do it right now. Okay, so 5 issues. This is really a great time because the Gallatin Range, that mountain range that I just pointed out, is the largest unprotected mountain range that's buttresses Yellowstone. And in 1977, they actually set aside 151,000 acres as a wilderness study area. So I don't know if you know all about the Wilderness Act of 1964, but basically you can have wilderness, and we talked about those real dark green areas or wilderness areas, but then they have wilderness study areas. So they think they might be good enough to be a wilderness, but they want to study them, and they should be protecting them so when they decide, if Congress decides they want to protect it as wilderness, it hasn't been ruined, right? So it's got a 151,000 acre wilderness study area, and then there's another 100,000 acres that the National Forest Service is open for comments until June 5th. And they're going to, for the next generation, this is how they're going to regulate and what they're going to do with this area. And it's about the most important unprotected area left in the greater Yellowstone. It's so close to Yellowstone National Park. And it's important for grizzly bears and wolves. There's rare Canadian lynx, there's wolverines, there's all kinds of endangered species that call this their home, their habitat. That crest there is a trail. There's a 25+ mile trail that runs basically from the northwest corner of Yellowstone almost to Bozeman, Montana, all along the Gallatin Crest. It's called, they call it the Devil's Backbone. I've hiked almost all of it. Spectacular area, but it's already being used by a lot of mountain bikes on that trail. It's getting dangerous for hikers up there. And I appreciate mountain bikes can be fun too. What we don't want, because they're gonna, if we're not careful, they're gonna let motorbikes, dirt bikes, and snowmobiles and all kinds of other motorized use in there. So they're asking for our opinion, and it's really easy to do if you want to do this, because on that list there is the Greater Yellowstone Coalition, which is a tremendous environmental organization. It's a coalition which actually counts the Sierra Club as one of its coalition members. They do a lot of stuff with Earth Justice, which was what formerly the Sierra Club group, right? Just changed its name. So if you go to greateryellowstone.org, it's on there. There's a special page, you can just click on it, and it takes you right to the Forest Service where you can file your comment, and they have some suggestions, but I suggest you want to protect that wilderness study area. They can't, without Congress, change it into a wilderness area, but they can protect it until Congress gets around to it, right? So that's number one. That's one thing I want to talk about. Then let's also, the next thing, talk a little bit about wild and scenic rivers. Okay, so you remember when we were talking about the Greater Yellowstone, there were lots of wild and scenic rivers, those pink lines down in Wyoming. Okay, the Snake River Headwaters Act, Senator Frank Thomas, as his dying wish, was that they protect the upper Snake, and they named the act after him, and the Republicans as well as the Democrats all were in favor of it, and they got it done. But Montana has only done one river that's protected. Good news last year, right there, the East Rosebud, with the support of the full congressional delegation. There's 2 senators and 1 House member, both Republican and Democrat, supported it, and they made that a national scenic wilderness river, right, protected. And it can't be dammed, so forth. But there's a new act that would protect, I think, like 27 additional rivers throughout Montana. What's it, the Wild and Scenic Rivers in Montana? Let's see. That would create 40 new wild and scenic rivers, including 18 in the greater Yellowstone. All these blue lines. So the Yellowstone is right here, and all these, this is the Gallatin and the Taylor Fork and the Bear Creek and Crevice Creek and Hellroaring Creek and Slough Creek. These all actually flow into the park, flow into Yellowstone River and then out. So we're trying to get support for the Montana Headwater Security Act of 2019. And so that's the second issue I wanted to talk to you a little bit about. Then the third issue is grizzly bears, okay? So there's real good news here, okay? When I was in Yellowstone, tour guide, I was on the road every day. And when I was working and when I wasn't, I was out hiking. And literally, I would see 2-3 grizzly bears a summer. More than that, black bears, and at the time there were only about 200 grizzlies in the greater Yellowstone, and most of them were in Yellowstone proper, okay? So since then, the grizzlies have done great, okay? There are now over 700 grizzlies in the greater Yellowstone. I see 2 and 3 grizzlies a day now. They are everywhere. I wear bear spray just to go across the parking lot at Old Faithful. I mean, that's all great. But so it's been delisted. It's no longer on the endangered species list. That was very helpful in building up this great population. And so Montana exercised real good judgment and decided, even though it was taken off the endangered species list, they did not issue any tags for grizzlies this last year. Wyoming did. I'm not really sure if Idaho did or not, but there's not nearly as many grizzlies in Idaho, so it's not as big an issue as it is in Montana and Wyoming. So the Greater Yellowstone Coalition, which I'm a big supporter of, is working hard to try to convince Wyoming to join Montana and not issuing more grizzly tags for hunting in the fall. In addition, the GYC is working, they got Idaho to build like 6 bridges that they started building in 2017 that would allow not only grizzlies but other animals to cross highways, major highways, without endangering themselves. And really interesting, so there's like 164 campgrounds and campsites throughout the greater Yellowstone in Forest Service areas, and they raised a bunch of money to put in bear boxes in all of them to help keep the human food from grizzly bears. So they're doing great, but there's more we can do. The next issue was the Yellowstone cutthroat. So how many people have fished in Yellowstone? Okay, got at least one. When did you do it?
Several years ago.
How many?
About 3 or 4 years.
3 or 4 years. The fishing wasn't that great, was it?
No, actually it was very good.
Oh, well, good. You got a great, okay, so here's what I'm going to tell you. So the Yellowstone cutthroat is a unique fish, okay? It spawns away from Yellowstone Lake. A lot of fish spawn in the lake. They lay their eggs, but the Yellowstone cutthroat spawn upstream away from Yellowstone Lake. And it's a huge source of early protein for grizz, okay? There's a little stream called Clear Creek that flows into Yellowstone Lake. It's not really big. I mean, it's 10, 12 feet across at the widest, and it goes up pretty fast. And they've been studying it since 1945. And they had the peak number of cutthroat trout spawning in that was in like the 1980s. There were 70,000 fish in this little stream. In 2007, there were 537 fish in that creek. Okay, what's happened? Well, the principal reason that there's been problems is lake trout, okay? The lake trout, probably introduced intentionally by fishermen, is a huge trout. It's like, they get 25, 30 pounds. They're tons of fun to catch, but they're disastrous for the Yellowstone environment. Because one lake trout eats about 50 cutthroat trout a year, and lake trout live for 50 years, and they promulgate exponentially, okay? So they first noticed lake trout in Yellowstone Lake, non-native lake trout in Yellowstone Lake in 1994, and the population was exploding. And so what they're doing, and there's actually some good news last summer for the first time, okay? They've got the private money's been there, and they've been netting lake trout. And they've been netting hundreds of thousands of lake trout every year and destroying them. And they changed the regulations so that for sport fishermen like this gentleman, pretty much catch and release of the good cutthroat trout, but you catch a lake trout, you got to take it, okay? So, and as of last summer, for the first time, they were netting fewer lake trout than before. They had a 30% drop. They had netted like 160,000 as of August of last summer, where normally they were netting about 260,000 for that same period of time. And they're hopeful that they may be turning the corner and getting a handle on eradicating the lake trout, or at least reducing their numbers so that the cutthroat trout can come back. And I mean, in the old days, in the 70s, you almost couldn't not catch fish. I mean, you would go out and you'd cast and you'd catch fish. I mean, there was so much. The fishing bridge was a famous spot where it's still named there in the park. You've probably been there. Huge, everybody was shoulder to shoulder on fishing bridge. You're just pulling fish out of there. So recently this gentleman was lucky. Recently it's been much more difficult to catch a cutthroat. But things are happening, good things are happening, hopefully there. And the fifth and final environmental issue I want to talk about is gold mining. Okay, and that's, I named our presentation tonight, Yellowstone's more precious than gold than it is. And there's also some good news here. Okay, so some of you may have been familiar with the gold mining issues in the 1990s. President Clinton actually got involved, and we actually traded some land elsewhere and got the Canadian gold mine that was out at the northeast corner of the park near Crown Butte, Noranda, out, and that worked out great. But in just like 5 years ago, two more mining companies wanted to come in just north of Yellowstone. This photo here is the Yellowstone River flowing towards you, flowing north. That peak there is Immigrant Peak, and below Immigrant Peak, this is just north of Yellowstone now, that below that peak was Immigrant Gulch, which was a gold mining area and silver mining area in the 1890s. So the same year as Yellowstone became a national park, 1872, they passed the General Mining Act, which is extraordinarily favorable on federal lands to mine. There's no royalties and there's no reclamation requirements. I mean, it's just, and it hasn't really much changed since 1872. They've tried, but they have not been able to change it. So two new mines popped up. One called Lucky Mining is on that creek that comes down just south, or just actually to the north side of Immigrant Gulch, and the tailings would have emptied into a creek there that flows into the Yellowstone River. It's important part of the Greater Yellowstone. And then also Crevice Mining Company group that flows into Crevice Creek, that flows into Yellowstone Park proper and then into the Yellowstone. But the good news, and they came really close, okay? The state regulatory body that oversees mining in Montana had done what we called a checklist agreement to allow mining to start. And if there hadn't been some lawsuits filed by the Greater Yellowstone Coalition and Earth Justice and a few other groups, they were like 1 day away from granting these permits. That was filed a couple of years ago, and they've been coming to fruition. So there's two groups. There's public lands and private lands. Okay, on private lands, there's been a number of suits, and we won one as recently as April last month. They determined that Lucky Mining, which is a larger mining operation, had to do a full environmental statement, which is going to take them years. So that's pretty much final, and so that's going to keep them from doing stuff on private lands for quite some time. Then on public lands, we had another great case where on a bipartisan basis, the congressional delegation from Montana got together and they supported and passed the Yellowstone Gateway Protection Act. And it just got signed by the president in March of this year. So they're taking away both the public and the private lands from these mining companies. But the issue's not dead yet because the crevice mining group is so small and less of a threat, but it's also a threat. They don't have to, they come under an exemption from the Environmental Protection Act, so they don't have to do a full-blown environmental statement study. So it's still there. We're fighting. Hopefully we'll be able to prevent that too, because Yellowstone is more precious than gold. So now I have some recommendations on some books if you want to read about Yellowstone. I brought copies of these. This is a really amazingly wonderful, easy to understand book on the geology of Yellowstone and Grand Teton. And a friend of mine wrote this book, Paul Schillery. This actually is out of print now, but you can get it on Amazon on the used books or Abe Books. And these are all on the little handout there. Searching for Yellowstone, give you a real sense of place for what Yellowstone is about. Another good friend of mine, he just retired, but the park historian, wrote Death in Yellowstone. Sounds morbid, but it's an amazingly gripping, interesting book. He chronicles every death in Yellowstone other than car accidents and natural, heart attack and so forth since it became a park. And as Lee, my friend who wrote it, I'd like to say, Yellowstone can kill you in more ways than any place else on earth. I mean, you can freeze to death in the winter, you can boil alive in the hot springs, you can be mauled by grizzlies, you can eat death camas, you can die from poison gas. There's so many ways to die in Yellowstone. It'll also make you respect it when you're hiking. And my own little book, and I brought some if you want to buy them, you can, Day Hiking Yellowstone. So now, do I have a few more minutes to talk about this app? Or can you stay with me for a minute? This app is really amazing. What did I do with the, here it is. Oh, and maps, Trails Illustrated maps, and also the Beartooth Publishing, which is a local Bozeman customer, with really beautiful maps. Those are the maps, and all these recommendations are on the handout. Now the app. Okay, so, and there's lots of different apps. Okay, so these are all on the handout as well, but there's an app for geysers that will tell you when 6 major predictable geysers, mostly in the Old Faithful area, when they erupt. There's an app that the Park Service has that help you plan your trip and everything. There's also a website that does the same thing. But then let's talk about the REI. Do we have a few of you that have downloaded it? Let me see. We've got a few. Okay, so you're gonna. I'll just go through this. If you haven't already done it, do so. So the REI app. Let's see if I can open mine. Come on. There it is. Okay, so open the app and then touch Yellowstone, and you'll come up with something that looks like that right there. The Union Falls. It's actually got my pictures on it, a lot of them. And then if you touch the little green thing that says trail map, well, actually, before you do that, you just scroll down. You can see it's got well, that's just the whole book. No, touch the trail map. I was right the first place. Okay, and you'll get a little map, and it's got numbers there. And if you spread it out, like right above the what is it, 171. There's 171 trails there. You just spread it out there, and just above that number, if you see Mount Washburn, and you can touch the little trail that says Mount Washburn, and we can follow along here. So there's 171, you spread it out, you get up your trail, you hit the trail, and then if you touch the little blue box there, Mount Washburn, and now you have a complete trail description, flora and fauna. If you hit this, how to get there, it'll guide you there on your map.
Wi-Fi on the hiking trails?
I'm sorry?
Wi-Fi on the trails?
Okay, the question is a very good one. You have Wi-Fi, you don't need it. Okay, if you download the trails, you just open the trails that you're going to take. Your phone, many people don't realize it, your phone has a GPS that uses satellites. It does not need cell phone coverage. Once you've downloaded it, and if you touch this little map, you have an elevation, and the little blue dot will show you how far along on the trail you are on the elevation, to show you where you are on this trail. This is all free. And there's no advertising. REI gave this to the Park Service as a birthday present. They came to me, they said, we love your book, we know you know about the park. It's normally a crowdsourcing thing, so anybody can contribute, but they asked me to pretty much do Yellowstone. So I did over 200 trails and parts of trails, descriptions here. So, but it's a great app, it's free, there's no advertising, it's, you get it, you'll enjoy it, I promise. That's, again, sort of how it works. And for those of you that have it, if you want to see, you can scroll down to the very bottom, and on each of the trails that I did, they give me a credit, and they give me a little link that you can go to, and you can buy my book from the Yellowstone Forever, which is, as I said, they run the visitor center, gift shops, and do all the education in the park. So, almost done. Again, I was talking about how to make reservations. We talked about that. There's two websites there, the National Park Lodges, and then the government, USNPS.gov, which is the official site for Yellowstone. Again, there's information on that in the handout. Let's sort of wrap it up. I've talked a lot about the Greater Yellowstone Coalition. It's a wonderful organization that is really on top of all the environmental issues. There are lots of other environmental groups. Bozeman is like an environmental mecca. There's like 20 some odd organizations that have offices, Northern Rocky offices in Bozeman, Montana, which is part of the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. And there's a brand new journal, mostly online journal, mostly free. They ask for contributions if you want to give it, called the Mountain Journal. I've got that on this too. It's an environmentally conscious article-driven issue. It's really great. Wonderful articles. It's starting to get quoted in the New York Times and the LA Times and all kinds of places nationally. Again, I've given you information about it. It's free. The Mountain Journal. It's really great. Oh, and okay, if you have a YouTube, you can go home. You can do it now, or you can go home and you can just pull up your YouTube, and it's on this here too. But if you just go, you won't believe what these Yellowstone buffalo do. That's my video. Is your thing by any chance connected to the internet? Is your laptop connected to the internet?
Yeah, I believe so.
Because if it is, you can actually hit this. It might work. No, well, wait a minute, hang on. Maybe it's going to work. I don't know how high tech we're going to be here. I don't know if it's going to work or not. At any rate, you go to your YouTube and search for You Won't Believe What These Yellowstone Buffalo Do. It was shortly after I put it up, it was getting like, I don't know, 300,000-400,000 hits a day. I was interviewed by USA Today and the Today Show and all kinds of other stuff. It's a fun video. It's 30 seconds long. Just go home and take a look at it. So, at any rate, I love Yellowstone. I'd love to sit around and talk to you afterwards. If you have any questions, I can take a few now. I think we're probably running out of time. But if you have any questions, it's up to you. Dan, do I take questions?
Sure. Questions?
Yes.
Why can't you paddle any of the rivers inside?
That's a good question. So, gentleman's asked, why can't you paddle in the rivers in Yellowstone? And you're right, there's only one river in Yellowstone that they allow you to paddle, and it's actually a channel. And it's like 3 or 4 miles, and it connects Lewis Lake with Shoshone Lake. And Shoshone Lake is that largest lake, backcountry lake in the United States. And so it's the only way to get there by boat is they let you paddle up creek. And but the rest of them, there's some environmental reasons. A lot of shorebirds use the shores of the various rivers that would be disturbed. In addition, there's some, remember all those waterfalls? I mean, there's some very dangerous waterfalls, a lot of backcountry rivers and streams that would be highly dangerous to folks if they weren't highly skilled.
Grizzlies.
I'm sorry?
Grizzlies.
Well, yeah, I mean, and it's just, it's just one more way to get out there and get in trouble. You know, I think it's the way the National Park Service looks at it. Yeah, and you can paddle all the rivers just about in Grand Teton National Park if you want to just go down there. And there have been some bills in Congress that would have freed up, but I don't think it's a particularly good idea. If they do it, I'll take my kayak and do it, but I'm going to honor the law right now. But it's a good question. Yeah.
The grizzly population is growing. Has there been any drop in the population of tourists?
Of tourists? No, but I'll tell you, I hiked right through a spot last summer. I was on a 5-day, 100-mile trek just south of Yellowstone to get to the most remote place in the lower 48. It's 25 miles in any direction to a highway in the thoroughfare. And on my way out, I hiked within half mile of where a hunter was killed 5 days later last summer. So, you know, it does happen. But no. There is a direct correlation between the number of healthy wolves and the number of healthy elk. Yeah, any other questions? Good questions.
Yes, over here.
Yes, please.
I had some rangers from the west side of the park that told me earlier, like 10, 15 years ago, if you don't want to carry bear spray just because it doesn't work in your tent, it doesn't work in the wind, depending on the wind and all that, that an little air horn.
Air horn. Yeah, okay, so the question is, does the bear spray work? Is an air horn good? You know, I am a true believer in bear spray, okay? I have several friends that have discharged their bear spray to good result. It'll work far better than any gun. A gun will just make him mad. Really, you might kill the bear eventually, but not until after it's killed and eaten you. So the bear spray, on the other hand, really works. And I strongly recommend it. It is problematic because you can't even pack it in a suitcase. You certainly can't take it on a plane. You have to buy a new $40 spray. There is now a concession in Canyon Village in the parking lot there. You can rent it for a nominal, I think it's like $10 or something. And there was actually a hiker that was able to use one of their rented bear sprays to stop a bear last summer, and it got a lot of favorable press. So I'm a big believer in bear spray. And the horn might work, but I don't know anybody that's used it. So.
But my question was about the use of the air horn.
Yeah, the air horn might work.
That is an easier, cheaper, and when you're in situations because of wind or in your tent or whatever.
Well, it is true that if there's a strong breeze, you know, and you got to learn how to use it. You got to point it down and not up, and you got to, you know. But I still am a true believer in bear spray. I don't know anybody that's used the air horn. I know you can buy them. It might startle a bear.
That was a recommendation from the rangers just to have.
Well,
And I just didn't know if you'd heard of it or experienced it.
I have not experienced it. I've certainly heard of it, but I'm a true believer in bear spray. So, any other questions? All right.
Okay, thanks very much, Tom. Not only was that informative, it was a very professional presentation. Before we adjourn, we will, if you wish, go to the Blue Goose after the meeting, where the club will buy you some nachos. I understand that you're going to join the group there, so you might get a chance to talk to Tom if you go to the Blue Goose. You all know where the Blue Goose is, up on Midway, toward Beltline.
Beltway and Beltline.
Beltline's Beltline's.
Wherever they said. And the other thing, Arthur, do you want to do Sierra Club 101? All right, we won't do Sierra Club 101 tonight. Well, that's it then. This meeting is adjourned.
Well, wait a minute, don't forget, we have the election table for volunteers or contributors.
There's a guy wanting money right over here.